Dear friends, today we have with us a very, very special guest. Today we have with us Nobel Prize winner in physics and the Vice Chancellor of the Australian National University. Professor Schmidt, thank you so much for joining us today. It's an absolute honor and a privilege.
And my pleasure too.
Yeah. Professor, I want to begin by asking you about the importance of STEM subjects, how important it is that a love of science is inculcated in the next generation of students. How important it is, do you think?
So the future world is going to be one that operates in the digital regime. So everyone is going to need to have numeracy and literacy. And so the numeracy encapsulates how you use math to learn and understand and predict around the world. And so it's going to be really important in almost any job imaginable, from farmers to astrophysicists and everything in between. So it's an essential part of the technological age that we're going through. And I think that every student is going to want to have a reasonable level of STEM skills, especially numeracy skills around data, around understanding how to use data, how to use information to change the world. So absolutely essential.
Yeah, and I think the reason I was asking that question is also because that even if everybody does not pursue science, I guess how important it is that people at least have, a rational and logical thinking, in the sense that they have that base, because of science communication or basic science skills that they're taught in school.
Yeah, so science is a gateway to use information, act on it, and understand and predict. So if you're going to be, let's say, a lawyer, well, we're going to be moving into a new way of sort of automatic contracts that are powered essentially by a scientific basis. Now, you're still going to have legal skills, but you're going to have those science skills interwoven with your legal skills. Or, I come from a family of farmers. Now, if you're going to farm, you're going to need to be able to go through and understand how to apply the right amount of water, the right amount of fertilizer, spray things at the right time to maximize how much you get out of the land. If you're going to be working as a technician within, the area, anything to do with electricity or with green energy, that's going to require a lot of skill because these new technologies are quite complicated and they're built up on scientific principles. So whether or not it's traditional humanities, it's manual labor stuff that we're used to, or actually technical things, they all are going to have science behind them.
Yeah. And specifically speaking about science and, I love space and astronomy and everything connected with it. Talking about the Square Kilometre Array Telescope project, can you tell us a bit about it? And also because Australia and India and several other countries are collaborating on it. So it's a very exciting project. If you could tell us something more about it.
So astronomy has always been used to go out and kind of explore the final frontier. And the current instruments that we're building include the James Webb Space Telescope in the optical regime. We have the Extremely Large Telescope in the Atacama Desert. And then in the radio regimes, we can use this digital technology we're developing to make giant telescopes made out of thousands of pieces that we use the computer to connect up and make a giant mirror. So instead of having to create a giant dish, that's 10,000 kilometers across, we can actually create artificial dishes using computers. So the Square Kilometre Array is about creating a huge telescope, a kilometer across. So essentially, this much bigger than anything we've ever done. And it's going to be made of literally tens of thousands of pieces we bring together. So that will allow us to go out and make the most detailed maps in the deepest maps where we can see further than we've ever been able to see of the universe, and allow us to see what the early universe looks like. How did the first stars form out of hydrogen gas after the Big Bang? But also, how do black holes form in the early universe? And they seem to have a very important role in how the universe has changed over time. And the technology Well, that technology is being used in all sorts of stuff. We look around technology around us, and these types of focal plane arrays that we require are becoming, ubiquitous, growing out of radio astronomy. And this is going to allow us to take that technology to the next level. It's hard for me to imagine what it will produce, but it's consistently produced more and more useful things. And that's kind of that indirect spillover, as we'd say, out of the astronomy work. The astronomy itself is great and interesting, but it pushes the boundaries and allows us to create products and things that we just didn't have before.
Yeah, like a domino effect of investing in science and technology. And talking about that, what do you make of India's recent lunar and solar missions, and especially the Chandrayaan 3, where India landed the rover on the south pole of the moon?
Well, I mean, India has really been cutting edge and taking some big leap forward, quite risky, big projects done quite inexpensively. So, really trying to be innovative of how they're trying to do the cutting edge research. And you saw how they've managed to get to the South Pole, start making measurements there at a budget which is sort of a tenth or a 20th or a 30th that anyone else has ever done. So that innovation is great because they're contributing to the body of knowledge, but they're also breaking the pathway of how all nations are going to be doing these really hard things. So space isn't just getting to the moon; it's using space to look down at the Earth. It's about new communication satellites that provide high-speed broadband to every place on Earth. It's all sorts of other things that are emerging. And so this trip to the moon is really part of a much bigger set of technologies, but it provides the impotence to us to go out and try something that you're prepared to fail on. And it's not really done by industry, but it ends up creating industry as part of it. So I think India can be incredibly proud of what they've achieved here. It is remarkable. But it also tells you of all the cool things you're going to be able to do in this area and other areas into the future.
Yeah, and also the launch of the solar mission just on the heels of the lunar mission. I mean, that also seems quite interesting.
Yes, and so being able to go through, I mean, rockets, which you have, a big program. Rockets are hard, and we've seen a lot of, unhappy failure also in that program, but that's normal. And you learn by trying things and pushing the envelope. So you can do the solar mission, which is very, very different than the moon mission, but they have the same fundamental pieces. And in the same way, those same fundamental pieces are going to be able to use to do these other things that have more earthly uses. And so it is part of an ecosystem that allows us to do new things that hopefully help bring and promote prosperity here on Earth.
Yeah. And talking about Australia and India space collaboration, because there was involvement of Australia as well in Chandrayaan, I think through the Deep Space Network with NASA. How strong is that collaboration between Australia and India in the space sector?
So it's in its infancy. We obviously have worked on astronomy in the past. That is now connecting to pieces of our space industry, which is very small but very, very technical, connecting into India's larger space where we can help do things. And so, what I saw with Prime Minister Modi's visit here earlier in the year is a real interest of trying to take the two things that we're doing and join forces where we can. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. But it is, I would say, at the early stages of development. We do work where we can, but I think we can dial it up at least an order of magnitude in the next year or two, if we so desire to.
Yeah, and I think Australia is also planning to have its own lunar mission soon. I think they're planning to send something over to the moon.
Well, I think we're part of someone else's mission, so we are working. We tend to work a lot with other space agencies. We do not have our own launch capability right now, and it's about creating some of the things
Mhm.
that we have this really deep technical capability in. So we have deep capability in robots. We have deep capability in laser communication. Um, and we also have some interesting capabilities, as I said, in radio frequency imaging and things. So being able to take that technology and connect it to bigger programs like trips to the moon, which that's how we're working as partners. So Australia, I think, has decided to partner on these big missions rather than try to do one entirely on our own.
All right. Also, Professor, you're Vice Chancellor of ANU. We've got a lot of Indian students coming to Australia. What is your take on that? Where do you see the education sector between the two countries going and this exchange of students?
So Australia has a very large number of students from India, and they go to a whole range of different types of university and higher education institutions. So it's a lot of people doing a lot of different things. So I think to prospective Indian students, you got to look at very much the institution and know that an institution like ANU is quite small. We only take 2,200 students a year from the entire world, mainly from Australia, but people from around the world. And, we're really good for people wanting to do high-end research in mathematics or in engineering or physics, or even in like law and things where we tend to work on. And then we have other institutions which are more skills-based ones, and we have ones that are entirely skills-based, and a whole thing in between. What Australia offers, I think, is a really good environment for Indian students. We have a lot of Indian culture here from the entire spread of the continent. I think a lot of understanding of Indian culture, and so a lot of opportunity to be part of a great education system. We do allow students to work quite freely compared to other places while they're here to help make it a little more affordable. And there's often a lot of opportunities for students, especially in the more skilled areas, to stay on in Australia and continue to work or go on to back to India or anywhere in the world, quite frankly. So I think it's quite a useful connection. And we're doing more and more research exchange where Australian students come to India and work in some of your great institutions there on the space programs and things. And so it's nice to see that two-way exchange starting.
Yeah, and I guess that exchange is also important in terms of shaping the bilateral relationship. I think that's quite important.
Absolutely. And, India, Australia is only 25 million people, India, 1.4 billion. So, that's a factor of 50 or 60 times. And so we're just a tiny little thing relative to India. But we do have a lot of complementarity. And so I really think in those research programs that we're doing together, whether it be energy transition, how are we going to create, a green energy future for India? Well, it's very similar to the green energy future for Australia. And, whenever you see a solar voltaic device, that technology was developed in Australia. And we still have some of the leading people developing really high efficient next generation solar PV. And wouldn't it be great to work with Indian entrepreneurs to help make sure the entire world gets cheap solar so that we can go out and keep the lights on and not fill the atmosphere with CO2.
Yeah. Just last question, Professor. Do you think Australia is investing enough in science? Do you think that maybe as a country it can invest more in R&D, or you think it's okay the amount of money that is being spent, given that Australia has a very good track record in some sense of having these inventions, as you mentioned, the cell, as well as I think parts of Google, the Google Map, I think was invented here. The bionic ear and things like that. Do you reckon that maybe we can do more in R&D, or you think it's okay where we are at?
So the R&D of a country, is a very long-term thing. So you think of cochlear and the bionic ear. Well, that's work that's 30 or 40 years old, and it's now becoming mainstream. So, we are kind of reflecting what we did 20 or 30 years ago. So as a country, we need to make sure that we invest sustainably in research. And that means funding research at universities. And I think the country could do a bit more, be a bit more strategic. But it's also about connecting that research to government, to make sure government uses research to be a better government, to have industry use research to be more profitable. And so it's about getting that whole ecosystem working. So Australia has turned down the knob on its research investment over the last 7 or 8 years. So we're better than a lot of countries, but we're worse than, given how rich of a country we are, we kind of stand out, relative to other countries of not investing as much as we should right now. And that will have consequences for us in the decades ahead. Not something that hurts you next year, it hurts you 10 years from now. So I think we need to turn it up a bit. But it's not just to universities, it's within getting industry, government, universities all working together for the common good.
Yeah. And for prospective students in India, who are looking to pursue higher education in science, who may be thinking of going to America or UK or Australia, what would you like to tell them that, why they should choose Australia and come here if they want to pursue, say, mathematics or physics and things like that?
Yeah, so I mean, the Australian higher education system is really, really good. Now, if you get into Harvard, I'm a Harvard graduate, and it's kind of hard to turn down, getting into Harvard. But Harvard only takes 50 or 75 people from India a year into their undergraduate program. And so my son, did a physics degree here, and I can tell you his physics degree was every bit as good as a Harvard physics degree. Now, it's not quite as gold-plated, but Australia offers really outstanding degrees, especially at the best research-intensive universities, if you want to do something like that. And we're very competitive in terms of price compared to the United States. So, we're half the cost of most US universities. And again, Australia understands India. And I think the hard reality is America doesn't really. So I do think there's a lot it's a little bit more comfortable to come to Australia compared to the US. But there are great institutions in the US, and if that's where you want to go, then go. UK, Canada also have great institutions, but go in with your eyes open and where your gut feeling tells you should go, and be really good at understanding the differences between institutions in each country, because they all each have our own specialty, and don't just assume one Australian institution is the same as every other one in the same way. Canada, the US, and the UK are all different as well. So be choosy, give yourself lots of options. But I do know that our students from India really have a great time here, and ultimately listen to your colleagues and see what they're saying.
And any inspiring words, Professor Schmidt, because you are a very, very inspiring figure. So any inspiring words?
Well, I think people always underestimate what they might achieve in their life. You don't really know. You give it your best shot. And the entirety of humanity is about everyone going out and doing the best they can. And we all connect to this big puzzle. And sometimes you're at the frontier of history, you win a Nobel Prize. Other times you do work that helps someone else win a Nobel Prize. Other times you just make other people's lives wonderful. So there's many, many ways to succeed, but they all involve doing the best you can. And I encourage all of your listeners to have confidence to go out and do the best they can. And the world looks after people pretty well who try hard.
Professor Schmidt, thank you so much for joining us today. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it's an absolute honor and privilege to have you with us here.
My pleasure.